Shecky's been in IT for over 20 years and has been working as a security engineer for the past 6. He's an organizer for Chicago BurbSec and a volunteer for Hack for Kids, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon,
However,
everybody. Today, I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about something called burnout. It's not going to be a highly technical talk. It's a subject that goes very deep, but is very important, especially for those of you just starting your careers here. As you get older, you start to understand it a little bit more, but it's not something that you hear people talk about it, but you think that can't happen to me, and it can happen to just about anybody. And it's one of the reasons why we have some of the issues that we have in the industry, in the field today. So burnout is real, or why I love trains. And yes, we will get into the train stuff in a little bit. There we go. So first off, who am I? I'm Shecky. I'm also known as Michael Kavka. I'm a senior security engineer for a futures trading company. I have my CISSP and just recently got my GCIH. You can reach me on Twitter at Silicon Shecky, and yes, I do tweet about trains occasionally. I've got my blog site. I help organize one of the BurbSecs here in Chicago, which is a security meetup. And I am a train and model railroad aficionado. I'm not the best in the world. I'm not the worst in the world. So let's get into the topic itself, burnout. What is burnout? The easiest way to describe it is burnout is that feeling of, I don't want to do this. You wake up in the morning, you don't want to go to work. You don't want to do anything. It's a loss of interest. It's an I don't care type attitude. It can lead to depression. It can lead to anxiety. And it's something that you really need to start looking at early on. The anxiety is usually about the first thing that I've found that people wind up having with it, that anxiety of, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to go into work? Oh God, here we go again, another job like this. Oh God, I'm going to have to deal with my boss again. It's not something that's fun to deal with at all. And it's something that leads people out of the InfoSec or whatever other industry that they're in, but especially in the InfoSec because we put so much pressure on ourselves. We think that we must have all the answers. We feel that we are imposters. Imposter syndrome can lead to burnout. Just about anything that makes it non-fun or non-worthwhile to yourself is a form of burnout in its own right. So, overworking is probably one of the biggest things that we've ever heard of from burnout. And you know it's those 24-hour day shifts, 12-hour day shifts, 7 days a week, the large amount of time with no break whatsoever. And that can be caused by poor management, not having enough staff on hand. Managers don't know how to deal with you or with other people. That brings things down to a section of what are they doing wrong? Who can I talk to about it? Can you, if it's management, talk to your manager. Say, hey, listen, you're pushing me too hard. You're pushing me too far. The best managers out there aren't going to want you to burn out. They're going to help you take that step back so that way you can go ahead and do that. The other thing that I've noticed that causes burnout is being over passionate. And the word passion at another con was brought up, and we had this huge discussion there about passion. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And it depends upon how you define passion. Passion can be as simple as having a very big interest in it. Passion can go into an area of all you want to do is XYZ. All you want to do is do your InfoSec. All you want to do is do your research. And you delve into everything on that, and that's all that you have, and you've got nothing else around you. So what happens when you hit that wall? A frustration level. You lose all interest again. You get into a situation with burnout where you need to fight it. The biggest mistake that people make in our field is paid time off. We all get it. People do not use it. And I don't mean using PTO to go to a security conference. I mean using paid time off as paid time off, telling your manager that, yes, I am taking this week off and I am not answering emails. I am not answering my phone. I am out of service. I need to rest and recharge my batteries. You need to take it. The PTO is there for that reason, period. It's there to give you that chance to take that step back, to step away from the grind, to step away from the stress. Now, that's not to say that you won't have other stresses on another side or from somewhere else, but to step away from that work stress, to get that off the mind. You run into another issue, though, and this happens with all of us. You're on vacation and you start wondering, especially as it gets nearer the end, what am I going to walk back into? And that's just something that there's not a real good answer for, how to stop it. The answer to that is you stop it by stopping it. The real answer is, and I found this, is talk to the people around you, talk to your family, talk to your friends, say, hey, listen, I'm starting to think about this. Can you distract me from it? Find something to distract you, whether it be a hobby, whether it be going out for a bike ride. Hobbies are a big way overall, even without paid time off, to go ahead and de-stress and fight that burnout. And I'll be showing you one of my hobbies in a few minutes here, which is trains, and you'll be noticing all the trains sitting in these slides here. Outside of the opening slide, all the trains are photos that I took. Family and friends, going out and doing a walk in nature with them, which I get into in the last bullet point there. Going ahead and just spending time sitting down playing board games, not computer games necessarily, but board games. Going ahead and sitting down and having a nice dinner with someone. These sorts of things, if you're into going ahead and singing karaoke, can be fun. Going to an amusement park can be fun. Something that, again, gets you away from that stressor level of work, that constant, oh my God, I have to think about this. Oh my God, I have to solve this problem. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I don't want to deal with this anymore. So you take that step back and you let your body refresh, you let your mind refresh. Meditation is a very good way to go ahead and relieve the stress if you want to start trying to do that. And that's just as simple as sitting down for 10 minutes and counting breaths. Meditation can be that simple. Just step away from it all. Don't force your mind not to think about anything. Just focus on one simple thing like counting breaths. These are all basic ways of helping to fight that stress, and that stress is what leads you to that burnout. In the movie Real Genius, they have a great scene there where they're talking about Laszlo down in the tunnels. And if you haven't seen the movie Real Genius, I highly recommend it. It's a fun, great 80s movie. But they're talking about the genius that came before him, the top dog that came before Val Kilmer and Mitch's characters. And Val's character, Chris Knight, goes ahead and says, yeah, he broke in a major way. He thought he loved solving problems, but he thought his answers were the answers to everything. So one day somebody told Laszlo that what he was creating was hurting people, and it cracked him severely. And that's something that we all have to understand. There is no answer for everything. InfoSec itself is really nothing more or less than risk mitigation overall. It is something that is constantly changing, and there is no way that you're going to be an expert in every single section of it. You might know a lot about specific areas, but there's always going to be somebody smarter than you, and there's always going to be a new question and a new way that pops up out there. And the best way of going ahead and being able to take care of that stuff is being fresh. Taking that step back, relaxing your mind out. I find, honestly, to help me with answering questions is stepping away from all of it for a bit. Because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, an answer will pop into my head. And that's something that should work for you also. Take a step back, stop thinking about it. You overthink it, you're going to come up with the wrong answer or the harder way of doing it. And you're going to start doubting yourself. And then you start doubting yourself, and then you start stressing about it. And then you start stressing about it, and then you hit that burnout level again. And it's not fair to yourself. The only way you're good for other people is to take care of yourself in the long run, physically, mentally, emotionally. You can go and see a professional for help, and I highly recommend that. There's nothing wrong with that. but you have to understand, and if you can't recognize the symptoms, talk to somebody else that you trust and see if they see these symptoms in you. The depression, the anxiety, the lack of wanting to do stuff, the losing interest in things that interest you, not just work-wise, but overall, because it all starts integrating together as you go down this path. So, as I said, there's a lot more to it than that. And we're going to get into the trains in just a moment here. But I want you to understand that I sound preachy. It's because I've seen too many people burn out. I've seen too many people just not lose it. We've seen in the industry too many people get to a point of no control anymore and not ask for that help. And we want you to be good. We want you to be safe. We want you to be able to help others. It's not something that's going to be easy. And it's not something that looking at oneself is always the hardest thing to do. And it's not something to be ashamed of. To turn around and say, I'm feeling burned out, takes a lot of credit to somebody to do that. Saying, I need to take a step back. I'm burning out. I need that time away. But you have to do it. Otherwise, you're just going to drive yourself into a ground and into an early grave. And that's not something anybody wants to see. It's happened to too many people. So let's get away from that and start talking about trains, and model trains. And what you're seeing here in this background this is my actual layout right here over on the left-hand side. That's my son running part of the layout. You've got a close-up of one of my newest engines that I've got, what's called a GG1. It was an electric engine. It was used a lot in Pennsylvania. You've got sitting next to the right there is a Shecky engine. It's a type of steam engine, but instead of horizontal drive rods, everything is vertical on it. They don't go fast, but they're very powerful. They were built for logging runs. And then finally is just a shot out the back of an old Pullman car that I took. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a moment, and we're going to get right into this. Why model trains? Why trains at all? Well, there's two different ways of looking at it. I do some rail fanning, which is going out and actually seeing trains out on the rails. I'm lucky I've got a train museum not too far away. My son absolutely adores training, pulled me back into all of this. And then there's the model railroading aspect, which you can do right in your own home. And you say, well, I've got a small apartment. Well, that doesn't matter. There are a few different scales of model trains out there. This is the next to smallest. I don't have the smallest one, which is even smaller. The next size down from here, which is called Z scale, and I'll go over the scales in a moment, is small enough where you could actually run it inside of a Pelican briefcase. You could actually make a setup along those lines. So you have your Z scale, which is the smallest one out there. You have your N scale, which you'll see a lot of. You have your HO scale. So you can see the difference in size. N scale is approximately half the size of HO. HO is approximately half the size of the infamous O scale. O scale, the best known manufacturer of O scale is Lionel. Lionel back in the day also made something called standard scale. Yes, this is an original 1920s era standard scale engine. Yes, it still runs. Yes, it's still the original motor inside of it. The wheels have been changed once or twice. I've gone ahead and done a little bit of work on it myself. That was actually my grandfather's engine right there. There's so much different areas of model trains in model railroading. You can get down to building models for your layouts. You can make a simple layout like what I've got, which is just some basic loops. You can get into intricate layouts with mountains and scenery. But in the end, you get into something like this. This is your basic engine. And yes, this is a 1920s one also. But you've got your armatures. It's basic electronics. This is a switch for allowing the train to go backwards and forwards. And it's pretty easy to work on itself. I actually am in the process of finding a new wheel for this, so that way I can get this one back up and running. The engine itself does run though. So you have your engines like that. You can learn electronics, not just from the engines, but from wiring up a track site. Simple tracks like what I showed you in my picture there is I have one controller per track. More complicated tracks, you have blocks and everything along those lines. Model building. This is actually from the 1970s here. My dad and I built this one. But you get houses, you can do building, you can do free building. The NMRA, which I had shown up on the slide, and I'll show it again when I reshare the screen, they've got all sorts of information on their website. The basics of wiring, track wiring, the basics of model building, but they go all the way up to master level stuff and master certifications in model railroading and building scenery and building track layouts, designing. Don't know if a lot of you realize this, but the original hackers, the original InfoSec people back at I think it was MIT, were model railroaders. You take a look at a model railroad track when you have switches and everything, and it's like looking at a network in its own right. So there's a tie in there. So it actually does make logical sense as to why, but you still get that step back as far as I'm concerned. There are different styles of trains out there. This here, if you look at the difference between this right here, which is one of my more recent trains, which I'm not running right at the moment, and this here, you go, well, one's a steam engine and one's a non-steam engine or a diesel. I go, yes, but there's differences that you don't see on the two of these also. This one here is runs off of what's called DCC or DC. DC and DC power is your basic setup. You plug everything in, you plug your controller in, and it runs around. DCC or digital command control gives you a way of going ahead and running multiple trains on the same track, timing out the engines so that way they don't hit each other, all the way down to actual sound effects such as chugging sounds and whistles and bells, and even the sounds of engineers on the trains themselves. Now you say, okay, so what do we get into when we're dealing with this? It can be as simple as starter sets to start off around $100 or so. If you want to go wooden trains with your kids, that's even less expensive to start off with a basic set. But you can go ahead and go through all different sorts of, you make it as complicated or as simple as you want. I sit down in front of my train set and I kick back and I relax, and I'll sit there for hours on end, just watching the trains go around, maybe reading a little something, just letting the white noise of the engines go at it. My son will come in and say, I want to run this train, I want to run that train. It gives me a chance to bond with him even more. So you're dealing with stuff that, again, for me, I find nice and relaxing. These trains come with, and I don't have a way of pulling this one apart. Let me go grab this one here. This right here is actually an engine from when I was a kid. This was actually one of my two favorites when I was a kid. And I'll show you what I'm talking about as far as ease of working on them, because top pops right off, and then you get into just got a couple basic wires going to a motor right in the center. And really upkeep on this is cleaning the wheels, putting a drop of oil in the bearings every so often, and lubricating the rods. And that's it. That's your most basic DC engine. And different DC engines will run different ways. You'll have ones that can go ahead and, like this one here from back in the day, was made for kids more so because it was made to be able to run fast. It doesn't like running slow. You have other engines such as this one here. If I bring this one up to full speed on the throttle, it's going maybe half the speed of this one on full throttle. So you get a difference in types. You can get involved with model railroad clubs in your area, and you can get involved with other aspects of it. Your hobby shops, along those lines, your hobby shops will always be willing to help out. It's a very friendly hobby overall, and there's always something to learn with it. Now, as far as the engines go and rail fanning goes, let me bring back my screen here. Now, as far as this goes, you've seen my picture here. You've seen this here. This is each one of these engines are different types. This is an SD40, I do believe. This is the world's largest steam engine, the big boy, which did a lot of traveling and was back up and running for the first time in 60 years back in 2019. But you have all these different types of trains out there. You can go out and do photography of them. You can go out to your local train yards a lot of times, or the tracks that run close by your house. And if you're into ham radio, listen to the chatter on your ham radio. There's a specific set of bands that you can use a scanner for, that you can listen to the traffic, to the chatter between the engines and between the control towers very, very easily. There's no encryption on or anything. They're wide open. It's fun to listen to, but it gets you outside and that. But there's some safety rules when you're doing the outdoor train stuff. Number one, you want to stay at least 25 feet away from the tracks. That's pure safety. If you don't do 25 feet away from the tracks, well, number one, most of the time you'll be trespassing. And number two, you're really risking yourself getting hit by the train or getting sucked in as the train goes by any sort of vacuum from the speed of the train going by. So enjoy the outdoor trains safely. Now, as they said, I threw this all together really fast, so it seems like I'm running a little bit short on everything. So I'm going to open things up to questions shortly, because I'm sure that a lot of you might have some questions on it all. And feel free to go ahead and ask away. Do we have any questions for starters?
Alrighty, so I don't see any specific ones just yet, but let me just ask a couple of my own real quick to see if we can emphasize a few different points. Going back to the burnout section, what kind of experiences with burnout have you had?
I've had a few different experiences with burnout, and actually none of it has really been. I've had one experience in the IT world with it directly, and that was back when I was doing network engineering and consulting. And I was the one-man crew, and there was no way I could take a break or anything. I was the last man standing in the department. And it started to affect me, and it really started to affect not just me, but my relationships with the young lady I was seeing, the lady that I was seeing at the time. My significant other and I, our relationship started to break down. I was worried about everything. I was constantly thinking I was going to get fired for the smallest mistake. And it was partially because I was working so hard, and it was partially because I saw everybody else jump ship. But it's along those lines. Now, as far as actual burnout goes, I used to do wedding photography. And that got to a point where it stressed me out so much that I stepped away from photography completely for a couple of years. Nowadays, I enjoy it as a secondary hobby, but it just got back. Any info on smart trains and new technologies being used? We'll get to that in a minute. But burnout to me has been something that, since I actually found a couple of real good employers I've worked for, they forced me to go ahead. They initially forced me to start taking time off. And nowadays it's like, okay, yeah, I need to step back. I'm going to take a step back. I need to take a mental health day, just a day
So
here or
that's
there.
so that's something you'd recommend that managers would do then, is to encourage their employees to take time for avoiding burnout.
I think that they should encourage it. I think they should encourage it where they are not getting in touch with that employee. I think managers need to be taught what warning signs to look for potential burnout. And a lot of that's because you're not going to see it yourself, or you're going to be afraid to talk to your manager about it. And you got to get over that fear. But if the manager sees it and says, I want you to take a day off, jump at the chance, because they're seeing something that you're probably not.
Excellent. Thank you for expanding on those points for us.
You're welcome. So it looks like we have a question inside of Slack here. Any info on smart trains and new technologies being used? I haven't thought too much about smart trains. There's a positive traction system that they use right now, and I like the idea of the positive. The PTC systems out there, I do believe is what they're called, are fantastic safety systems. The new technologies that are coming out on the trains, again, I don't dig as deep into some of this as some people do, and I'm just catching up with some of the technologies, but they're coming out with some nice stuff. The model railroad side of stuff, the technologies are just unbelievable. The on the rails side of stuff, the newer engines with some of their controls in it are fantastic. The rules for safety out there are fantastic. The problem is with all these new technologies, there are now older trains that cannot run on the rails because, or cannot run on specific types of rails because they don't have the new technologies and can't be retrofitted easily. The PTC system is a great example. The big boy, which I showed you, does not have a PTC system in its cab. So behind it runs an actual diesel engine with PTC in it that does dynamic braking and makes it safe for the A class or the major railroad lines. Smaller railroad lines, local lines don't have that PTC requirement at this point in time. So they could run something like the Shea or the Silver Streak type engine that I showed you before. All right, do I have any, I hope that answers your question a little bit. As far as technologies on the model railroading side, probably the newest technology that people are starting to use is Raspberry Pis and Arduinos to go ahead and run their layouts. Do you have any thoughts on unlimited PTO and how that plays out? Unlimited PTO has pluses and minuses, and yes, I have a big thought on that. A lot of places that I've seen that have unlimited PTO, it's like, okay, yeah, take the time off when you need it, and you never think that you need it. It doesn't force people. What I prefer to see is if somebody's going to be doing unlimited PTO, that a place goes ahead and does a mandatory week of paid time off for an individual. Quite honestly, unlimited PTO is a fantastic thing in theory, but when you're a workaholic, you're just going to ignore it. If, on the other hand, you force an employee to say, okay, there's a mandatory week off and we are shutting down your accounts and you're not going to be able to see your email or anything, I would much rather see, if you're going to have mandatory or unlimited PTO, I think they need to add that in to the equation on it all. So that way people are forced to take that week. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of people that I know that have the unlimited PTO, it's unlimited PTO and they don't take advantage of it, and their management doesn't do a lot with them, and they wind up not even really taking PTO. It's a working vacation. So Yeah, mandatory PTO is used in banks to check people aren't actively defrauding the system. That's one of the advantages of it, is that you can go ahead and do a check on a user account, et cetera, and stuff like that. But it really needs to be done also to go ahead and let somebody recharge and refresh. And if you don't have a way of recharging and refreshing, talk to friends, start learning. So I'm hoping that with PancakesCon, you've gone ahead and turned around and found that you got a new hobby or something, some new interest, whether it be trains or mountain climbing or cooking or birding or DJing. So any other questions, either on trains or on Burnout?
So I do have another, just a little bit of curiosity. You mentioned the digitally controlled trains. Do they signal through the rails or something like that? How does that work?
Yes, digital command control. It signals through the rails. What it does is it sends a pulse through the rails. So basically, it's using the pulses as binary code, which is why it works so well with switching over to Arduino or Raspberry Pi for control systems even nowadays. So there's a caveat with it also. You can go ahead and run a DC, a non-digital controlled engine on a DCC track, but because of the way the DCC signals go, if you let that engine idle, that non-digital engine idle, it will burn up. You will burn out the motor inside of that engine because of that pulsing. Now, can you run a DCC engine on a DC track? You can do that very easily. In fact, a lot of companies make it so that way certain basic sounds, if the engine has sounds, will automatically run, such as whistles or bells, while you're running it on a DCC track. But yeah, it's literally a pulse inside of the electricity that goes ahead and sends the signal and it binaries it.
Thank you. That's actually really fascinating.
It's a neat system to go ahead and dig into. I've just started playing with DCC and I don't have mine set up right at the moment, but it's something that I really started looking into, and as I learn more about it, I'm tempted to take a Pi or an Arduino and start working with that to see how much better of a system I can come up with as opposed to what's just out there right now. So if there's nothing else, I want to thank you all for listening. I hope this came off very well for everybody and you were able to learn some stuff. And I'll see you on the rails.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shecky, for your presentation today and for stepping in for us.